Okay, so let's talk about thesis statements. So thesis statements are a key aspect to many, if not most, types of essays that you'll have to write, whether in this class, Comp 1 or Comp 2, or in any other English or writing class, or basically any other class where you will have to write something, produce a written essay or whatever. So usually you need a thesis statement. So it's basically a fancy, more advanced version of a topic sentence. And so what we're going to do is talk about how to produce your statement, the kinds of questionings you need to go through, how you go from point A to point B with having your topic, then to producing this long, or I guess not super long, this statement that is in depth and is that basically the keystone for your writing. So let's look at thesis statements. So typically it's about 1 to 2 sentences, and it identifies the topic of your writing, or it also lists the main points that you're going to talk about. It's up to you really on how you do that. I personally prefer when I write to the part where it has like the main points listed in your thesis statement. That's just my personal preference. That does not make it better. So if that is not what you prefer, then that's okay. I just like that just because it keeps me, my thoughts and then my writing, it keeps them both linear, just like the outline helps it keep you in line and in check. So the same thing with that. But either way is fine to do. If you go through this list of questioning, these stasis questions, that will help you figure out kind of where you need to go. You might have a really broad topic and you know what you want to talk about, but it's like, okay, well, I know I want to talk about, Beyonce. But okay, what about her? Like, there's a whole bunch of different things that I could talk about, positively, negatively, maybe this work stuff that she's done, or this music, or whatever. There is a huge realm of things you could talk about. So going through these lists of questions can help you kind of figure out where you want to go and where you have the most resources for, etc. So this questioning technique is it's an ancient technique. It helps you sort through your research to help you develop your claims, the research that you've already done. So it kind of helps you figure out, okay, this is the information I've gone through, and how can I pull out a claim from it? Also helps you pinpoint your key arguments of the issue that you're researching, and helps you identify the kind of claim that you'll want to make. So these are the different questions that you can ask, and they have different aspects or different ways that you would look at whatever the topic is. So the first one is, what is it? That's where you're focusing on the facts. The next is, how do we define it? That's where you're focusing on the definition. Is it good or bad? So that's where you're evaluating the topic. What caused it? So is there a cause with it? What are the effects? Are there consequences? And what should we do about it? Like, what is a proposal that you have for it? And so I actually have an example of this. So say the topic is the psychological effects of visitations for children of mothers who are in prison. Okay, so that's your topic. Okay, but what are you going to talk about with it? I mean, there's lots of different things you could talk about. So using 2 of those questions, you would actually go through all of them, but we're just going to look at 2 of them on here. We're going to look at the consequences questioning and also the proposal question. So the consequences one is, what are its effects? So the consequence claim could be, because remember you're answering in response to what your topic is, granting visitation rights to incarcerated mothers would or would not improve the lives of their children. Okay. So that's something that the writer would think, okay, is that something that I like? Is that something where I could find enough information on? All of that, or do I have enough information for it? The next, the proposal claim. So that's answering, what should we do about it? Prisons should or should not grant visitation rights to incarcerated mothers. So it's the same topic as you see, but there are 2 different viewpoints, basically, that you were looking at with that particular topic. So finding your claim. So it says you could build an argument around either of those questions or any of the other ones in the list, for depending on what you came up with it. So in fact, the consequence claim for that particular one might turn into a reason to support the proposal claims on that particular example that I gave you guys. So when you work through your stasis questions, it helps you kind of identify your different range of possibilities of where you could go with your reasons and in your thesis statement. So it kind of helps you figure out what claim you want to make and what you want your claim to be. So making your claim. So once you've generated all your different possible claims, just take your time and figure out which one you want to pursue. So your choice of which claim to pursue might depend on your analysis of the issue. You might also think about these other factors. Are people arguing this point, or is it just kind of like old news and nobody wants to hear about it anymore? Is it something where that is the information is already available? It's kind of like everybody knows this now, so why beat a dead horse, so to speak? Another question you can ask is, which claim does the evidence support the best? So out of all your different claims that you came up with from answering those questions, where do you have the most amount of information? Which one would, in essence, which one would be easier to support? I'm not saying go with, do the easy thing, but you need to be able to have that information available. The next is, which claim seems most interesting? Okay. Is it a total snooze fest, or is it actually interesting? So if you think it's interesting, then cool, go with it. I'm very big on, even when I choose things a lot of times for class, like a video or a topic, I'm like, I think that's interesting. I bet they will too. It's just human nature. People want to read and look and watch things that they find interesting. And the next one, which claim will be most persuasive to your audience? So even if you're doing a research paper, a persuasive paper, whatever, there's still an aspect to persuasion in it. So even with a research paper and you are saying, and you're just presenting the evidence, there is still a slight element of persuasion in that, even though you're not trying to give a call to action, you're not trying to convince someone to do something, you're still saying, this is my viewpoint and of XYZ topic, and this is why this is important. For example, I have my book right here, actually. So my book I've been reading, Finding Freedom. So this is, if you don't know, it's about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And now I've read news articles that say, well, it is written favorably towards them. And other articles are like, well, it's just written factually. But while it is just a biographical type book, it is just, it's not a argument or anything like that, but things are still written in a way that, may purposefully or not show them in a better light. There are other books that don't, and that can go for any type of topic. So while it isn't a persuasive or argumentative genre, it's still that author's opinion and viewpoint still finds a way of coming through. So after all of that, you have to find your good reasons because once you have your claim, okay, remember, then you have to come up with reasons. So you think about this with your reasons. So which of the reasons will be most persuasive to my audience? Which of the reasons can I support with my evidence? And which of the reasons seems most or more reasonable or anything like that, and which one's kind of far-fetched. So for your topic, when you have your claim, come up with the reasons that you can have from your evidence, and then make sure that they fit under these things. And then lastly, I have a thesis checklist. I'm also going to post this for you guys, so you just have a quick at a glance checklist for yourself. So your thesis, remember, it's more than just like a general statement about your main idea. It establishes like your clear position on whatever it is that you're writing about, and use this checklist to kind of help you check yourself and make sure you are on task properly. So these are things to avoid when you're creating your thesis. So first, your thesis is not a title, okay? So for example, homes and schools is the title, versus parents ought to participate more in the education of their children. That's a good thesis. And please note that is also debatable. So parents ought to participate more. That is something that is debatable. It is arguable, which is a key point of a thesis. It needs to be something that it isn't just, if it said teachers educate the children, well, no duh, because that's the job. That's not really arguable unless you're trying to, be super shady. But parents ought to participate more in the education of their children. So that is definitely something that is, someone could argue it one way or the other. So even though it is not necessarily an argumentative paper that you're working on, this is something, the thesis does need to be something that is somewhat debatable. The next is, a thesis is not an announcement of the subject. So my subject is the competence of the Supreme Court versus the Supreme Court made a mistake when it ruled in favor of George W. Bush in the 2000 election. So there are two different things. My subject is the incompetence of the Supreme Court. And then that's like the announcement of the subject. The thesis would be, the Supreme Court made a mistake when it ruled in favor of George W. Bush in the 2000 election. Also, a thesis is not a statement of absolute fact, because it has to be debatable if absolute fact can be debatable. So Jane Austen is the author of Pride and Prejudice. Really, it's astounding. So that's not a thesis statement. That's just a fact. And the next is, a thesis is not the whole essay. The thesis is just your main point. It's your idea, your claim, all of that. And it's expressed in a single sentence. If it needs to go into two sentences, that's fine. But one sentence is totally fine. Let's see. Also note that according to the MLA handbook, they say a thesis statement is a single sentence that formulates both your topic and your point of view. But like I just said, if your paper is more complex, or if you need to have a lengthier thesis statement, then usually, two sentences is fine. If it's like a paragraph long, then you need to condense that sucker, because I just 1 to 2 sentences. So these are the do's basically for your thesis statement. So a good thesis is unified. So for example, detective stories are not a high form of literature, but people have always been fascinated by them, and many fine writers have experimented with them. It's okay. Versus, detective stories appeal to the basic human desires for thrills. Very clear and concise. So if you are not able to be clear and concise in your thesis, see how you can hone it down a little bit. Maybe talk with your peers. Also, don't forget, you can just reach out to me and I can help you whittle it down, so it's not kind of like that first one where it's just like kind of overwhelming with information. Also, a good thesis is specific. So, for example, James Joyce's Ulysses is very good, versus James Joyce's Ulysses helped create a new way for writers to deal with the unconscious. Okay, it's very good. That's good. But what about it? Okay, so what? So remember, a lot of these questions with your thesis statement needs to answer the question, so what? So if it has your reader being like, yeah, okay, then where else could you fine tune it and add a little bit more depth? The next is try to be as specific as possible without providing too much detail when you're creating your thesis. So your intro, and I see this with students a lot, with your introduction in general, where they just want to dive right into putting all the meat of the information in there. And your introduction should merely introduce what you're going to talk about very briefly. You know, 5 sentences-ish, somewhere in there. I have got intros before from students and they're like a page long and I'm like, whoa. So with that being said, your thesis statement goes in the introduction. So the same thing, your thesis statement needs to be clear and concise and very specific. You don't have to give all of this detail and everything in the thesis statement. If you find yourself doing that, it's okay. You can just move that detail to the body paragraphs because I'm sure it fits in there somewhere, but it doesn't have to be in your thesis. Your thesis is just the 1, 2, 3 main points that you're going to hit. And that tells the reader, oh, I'm going to learn more about those points when I continue reading. So, for example, James Joyce's Ulysses helped create a way for writers to deal with the unconscious. Okay. Versus James Joyce's Ulysses helped create a new way for writers to deal with the unconscious by utilizing the findings of Freudian psychology and introducing the techniques of literary stream of consciousness. I was trying to say unconsciousness. So you are being very specific. I mean, the first sentence is, it's good. James Joyce's Ulysses helped create a new way for writers to deal with the unconscious. That is good. But to give the reader just a little bit more to know what exactly, okay, how to deal with the unconscious, how, okay, just give them one quick, few word topic to know what your other reasons were. And this author's reasons are here. By utilizing the findings, of Freudian psychology and introducing the techniques of literary stream of consciousness. So that tells the reader, okay, well, I'm going to read about how they deal with the unconscious, probably by, I'm going to learn about Freud and how he comes into that. And also I'm going to learn about the techniques of literary stream of consciousness. So I have no idea what those are when I start reading the intro, but I know when I'm going to read the body paragraphs, I'm going to learn about how that ties in with James Joyce's book.